Unbelievable. Inside the top secret South China Sea military bases. What tactics has China already been performing in the South China Sea for decades? In today's video, we will be discussing inside the top secret South China Sea military bases. For nearly a century, the South China Sea and its surrounding waters have been the site of territorial disputes. Presently, China, Brunei, Taiwan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, and the Philippines all claim the right to all or part of the sea in which the islands are located. These are several causes for the area's high level of competition. The main reason is that South China values the route as a commerce route. While it is commonly stated that the sea transports $5.4 trillion in global trade each year, the actual figure is closer to 3.3 trillion. That is still a significant sum, accounting for around 15% of world trade annually, and nearly 40% of all trade in China. Controlling the South China Sea would give whoever successfully laid claim to it not just economic power over trade routes, but also security. Sending cargo ships through an area where half a dozen hostile nations claim control, not to mention pirates, is not always the safest route to carry cargo. Having globally recognized sovereignty over those routes will increase their ships' security. There would still be pirates, and there would be crude oil and natural gas. The seafloor is thought to be home to billions of barrels of oil and trillions of cubic feet of natural gas. Such resources would be explored and used by whoever controlled the territory. They would also have rights to the fish, which is a significant factor in the equation. The fishing sector in the South China Sea employs 3.7 million people legally and unofficially, with the Spratly Islands being one of the most contentious places in the sea. There was an archipelago of roughly 20 small islands totaling 440 acres, until China erected 7 artificial islands totaling approximately 3,000 acres in 2013. Foreign islands have always been a source of contention, with the most recent conflict erupting over 70 years ago. Before Japan took possession of the islands in the 1930s, France was acknowledged as having acquired them. During WW2, Japan signed the Treaty of San Francisco in order to establish peaceful relations with the Allies. One section of the 1951 deal stated that Japan would surrender control of the Spratly Islands, although the treaty did not specify who would obtain control of the islands. As far as neighboring nations were concerned, this meant that the islands were no longer owned by anyone and were open to annexation. The majority of claims to annex all or part of the islands are based on the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. These claims are either related to the country's continental shelf or to the country's 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone, as defined by UNCLOS. While those claims are argued within the framework of the treaty, it results in overlapping areas in which nations may assert rights. Nevertheless, China has a new trend of claiming sovereignty of the islands that were previously in the control of UNCLOS. China claimed that they had historic rights to the islands since they had been fishing and taking refuge on the small islands from around 200 BC. While arbitrators have issued rulings on the topic, no agreement has been reached. For decades, small-scale island building has occurred in the Spratly Islands in an attempt to strengthen the nation's claims to the territory. Taiwan and the Philippines were principally responsible for these attempts, although China was not interested in constructing islands on a modest scale. Their efforts began in 2013, and by 2016, the 7 islands they had built amid the Spratly Islands had not only totaled more than 6 times the landmass of the original isles. Yet, they accounted for more landmass than all other nations' man-made islands combined throughout history. Making an artificial island is actually a fairly easy procedure that dates back to ancient Egypt, despite the fact that we tend to think of it as a more modern practice. The first phase is to construct the island's foundation, which is often accomplished by excavating a huge flat area on the sea floor and filling it with gravel before adding boulders or bags of sand on top. A dam is erected around the base from there. The cover dam is a watertight structure constructed around the base of the islands. It is often made of metal or concrete, and water is pumped out of it to allow for the construction of the island. This structure prevents the materials used to build the island from falling into the sea. Rather than creating a base this way, China built the islands on top of existing undersea structures, most notably coral reefs. Yet, due to the geopolitical ramifications of their island construction, this choice has received a great deal of criticism. When an artificial island is formed in a lake or off the coast of a continental mass, sand is frequently carried from the mainland to the water. Nevertheless, for China's endeavors in the Spratly Islands, this was not an option. It would take far too long to bring sand from mainland China to the construction site. Instead, they opted to dig out the sea floor with ships known as cutter section dredgers for use on their new island. The Tianu, China's largest cutter section vessel, can dredge the equivalent of 3 swimming pools each hour. Unfortunately, because this dirt came from the bottom of the sea, it would have a far higher water content than sand transported to the site. A drainage pipe had to be installed in saturated soil so that liquid might finally seep out of the sand and escape via the pipe. China was the sole claimant to the South China Sea who did not establish an airfield in the Spratly Islands. This was viewed as a significant tactical disadvantage and was the primary motivation for the creation of these artificial islands. China has not been forthright regarding the capabilities of these military outposts, so we must rely on images of the islands for the most part. Subi Reef, Mischief Reef, and Fiery Cross Reef are the 3 militarized islands. The main thing we know for certain is that all 3 have flight strips large enough to accommodate big aircraft. Before performing testing with military chairs, China officially tested these airstrips with commercial airliners, despite the number of facilities on the island and the speed with which they were built. None of the photographs available depict them as bustling centers of activity. Many of the structures have been reported as appearing to be in decay, despite having been constructed as recently as 5 years ago. That's not to suggest they're unmanned. Similarly, Chinese outposts on these islands issued strong warnings to U.S. Navy ships conducting FREMO navigation operations in the region. The U.S. routinely undertakes these operations around the world in regions that one nation has attempted to claim despite being designated as international seas. During the course of these activities, no action has been taken against the United States, except a series of warnings from the islands, though in the media, the Chinese government has cited these incidents as provocations. So far, the bases in the South China Sea appear to be running on skeleton crews and have done little more than issue idle threats and serve as refueling stations for Chinese aircraft and naval vessels. This answered the obvious issue of why China wants to start on the world's largest island-building endeavor to begin with. While being the only nation contesting the region without an airstrip in the Spratly Islands was considered as favoring China in the case of actual confrontation. According to popular belief, these islands would be a liability. Because of their remoteness from mainland China, they would be difficult to defend, and keeping them fully manned and running would be an extremely costly endeavor. These islands are thought to have been erected as part of China's military strategies, such as cabbage wrapping or salami slicing. The Chinese military employs cabbage wrapping tactics to gain control of islands by surrounding and overwhelming them with layers of different vessels, ranging from naval ships to having these island bases that both harbor naval vessels and provide a resupply point for other ships could aid them in applying cabbage wrapping tactics on the other islands. Salami size, also known as nibbling like a silkworm in Mandarin, is a significantly more diabolical method. It is founded on a vast number of little provocations. When done one at a time, none of the activities would constitute or justify a declaration of war, but if done all at once, it could have. As a result, China is gradually putting itself in a better position for the future without providing adequate grounds for military action against them. Artificial islands are an extension of the salami slicing tactics that China has already been performing in the South China Sea for decades. They would repeatedly pursue aggressive moves against other nations claiming rights to the region, but would quickly back down when met with real resistance. That's all. Thank you for watching. Do not forget to like and subscribe to our channel and ring the bell icon to get more videos.